Good luck.
There you go.
Hi guys, we're pleased to be back with our latest in our RGG live series on Facebook, and we're honoured today to have Maria T. Mora, economics professor from UT Rio Grande Valley. Maria, great to see you, great for you to be here with us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm really enjoying being here.
Before we talk about your work at Utrgv, your educational achievements, and the books that you've published, your work now with the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, I want to talk about an event that Utrgv has today that we can promote here. It's a few hours from now, and it's going to be happening in Weslaco, and I know you're aware of it. So in Weslaco at 2 o'clock today, Utrgv's Center for Innovation and Commercialization, there's an event there. I'm guessing it's a groundbreaking?
It's a groundbreaking, and they're going to do a beam signing ceremony.
That's right.
Yeah, so it should be very exciting because this is another example of Utrgv spreading out across the valley and having a transformative impact, not just for the lives of our students, but also for the community. This is going to be a major deal for this particular event is going to be in Weslaco, but it is meant to be a valley-wide type of
I know the folks at the Weslaco Economic Development Corporation are super excited. It's a big deal for the Mid-Valley to have Utrgv having such a big presence there. But like you say, it's beyond the Mid-Valley. This is a centre that the whole of the Rio Grande Valley will benefit from, because it's going to encourage budding entrepreneurs, students to learn about business and the world of commerce, and learn their craft there at the university, and then branch out and hopefully become tomorrow's business leaders. I think that's the theory.
Exactly, yeah, and it's going to be basically like a business incubator area. But in addition to that, they're going to be housing the Robert C. Becker College of Business and Entrepreneurship's PhD program. And the PhD students will be housed there. There'll be faculty offices. So it's a really fantastic way to integrate the students, the PhD students, undergraduate students, community members, all interested in small business and entrepreneurship.
I doubt that either of us can remember the address, so we'll just say Weslaco, 2 o'clock.
Yes.
Google it, check out the Utrgv website, and we certainly will be there because it's a very great event today. Okay, and so now we'll talk a little bit about yourself and the economics work that you do. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you've taught in other states beyond Texas, so you know your upbringing and your educational achievements, etc.
All right, thank you. So I'm originally from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I got my bachelor's and master's degree in econ from the University of New Mexico, which is in the hometown of Albuquerque, and then I went to Texas A&M for my PhD. The reason why I went to Texas A&M is because at that time they had a very robust labor economics PhD program. And I was very interested in studying issues related to labor, particularly with respect to Hispanic labor market outcomes. So after I got my PhD, I went to New Mexico State University, was there for 7 years, was a tenured faculty member. My husband was here at what was then UT Pan American, it's now become Utrgv. And so for several years we did a long distance thing, and I moved here in 2002.
Okay, so you've been at UT Pan Am and then Utrgv ever since?
Yes, correct.
Great, okay. And we're going to just jump straight into the appointment that we wrote about late last year, when Robert Kaplan, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, came to the Rio Grande Valley, and you sort of interviewed him for a discussion on the Valley's economy, the Texas economy, US economy, trade with Mexico, and the announcement was made at that meeting, that event, that you're going to be on the board of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Tell us what that's going to mean for you.
Okay, well, I'm actually very excited about this opportunity. This is with the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. The San Antonio branch has a board of directors. It has several members from within the San Antonio region, which covers the valley. And the idea with these appointments is we'll be meeting about every 8 weeks, or I'm sorry, 8 times a year, basically every 6 weeks, to essentially provide inputs, anecdotes, some of the things that we're seeing here on the ground, that the information is designed to trickle up to not just within the Federal Reserve, the Dallas Fed, but also within the Federal Reserve System. So the information that we'll talk about at our meetings will be shared with the Dallas Fed president, who will then take it to the Board of Governors. And it'll be information that they want to have to find out what's actually happening, again, on the ground, rather than in just the elite policy circles.
Well, I know in the past that Robert Lozano, the businessman
Yes.
with the Dairy Queen franchise here in the Valley, he's been on that board. Is he also on the board with you?
Yes, he is. So actually, we're very fortunate that we have two people from the area, from this particular region, to be on the same board. So yes, in fact, we just had our first board meeting, my first board meeting yesterday.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I just got back from
So we've got some hot news on everything you discussed.
That's right. So
That's great.
it was very interesting just having the discussion. I've heard about these boards of directors, but I've not been on one. And so what you asked what it means for me, I'm just excited to have an opportunity to share my input, but also to learn and find out what being a board member entails.
What does it say about the Rio Grande Valley that there are two appointees to that board of directors?
I think it's very exciting, and it shows not the concern, but the interest that the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas has in our particular region. And again, given all the growth that we've seen, population growth, I think that our area has been up and coming for a very long time, but it's good to be on the radar of the Dallas Fed.
So is there any hot news coming out of that meeting yesterday
No,
that you can share with us?
I don't think there's going to be any hot news. It culminated with, there was an event open to the community where Keith Phillips gave an overview of the Texas economy and some of the forecasts for 2018. They also provided a summary of what was happening in the state.
So
the state
can you recall, in his opinion, how things are going to go?
Things seem to be going pretty well. I know that they'll have, at some point, it should be very soon on the website, they'll have his presentation, so people want to look at some of the specific numbers. But it seems like lately the Texas economy as well as the U.S. economy have been doing pretty well. So
when Robert, Mr. Kaplan came down and you interviewed him at the Embassy Suites, I guess
it was Embassy, yes, at the Bettis Center.
You talk about how the fact that there's two Valley appointees to that board of directors, that speaks to the importance of this region to the Federal Reserve Bank. That was also evident in the remarks he made. He was, very engaging, answered all the questions, had obviously done some homework. It seemed to me, as a reporter, it seemed as though he had done his homework he knew a lot about this region, he had some ideas, and he was encouraging the business leaders here in the Valley to go to the schools and teach literacy, not just financial literacy in general, and that will pay dividends in the years to come with a more educated workforce, etc. Can you recall, what did you get out of that discussion with him?
I was actually very impressed. Like you said, he did his homework, and I don't remember when he took over as president of the Dallas Fed. He hasn't been president that long, so it's certainly a big learning curve for him, but he knew how important international trade is, and particularly trade with Mexico to this region. He is very well versed in terms of skills gaps and the importance of literacy and making sure that we have a well-educated and trained workforce to be competitive as we move forward.
Mm-hmm. He spoke about the trade with Mexico and the importance of it.
Yes.
And that's often overlooked. The Rio Grande Valley, the border region in general, they get, as a region, we do get some bad publicity, for certain things, and people do not appreciate how important an economic player this region is for the Texas economy, and how interwoven our economies are, the Texas and Mexico economy. And he did address that. Can you talk a little bit about that from your research?
Yes, and that's something that I think a lot of people outside of the area are not familiar with. You hear nationally a lot of very negative press, but people need to come down here to actually see how interdependent our economy is on the Mexican economy. At the presentation yesterday, I don't remember the exact number, but they had some estimates about the number of jobs that were created in Texas as a result of just exporting to Mexico. And so if there are concerns if we begin putting up barriers to trade, it's not going to just affect Mexico, it's certainly going to have effects on this side of the border. In addition, a lot of the imports from Mexico are coming into the region for manufacturers, and so if there are additional costs to the imports coming in, it's going to affect the manufacturers on this side of the border, and again, likely to have employment effects.
And I do remember him making the point regarding Mexico, because we wrote a story about it afterwards, where he said he hopes and he's concerned that any of the rhetoric that's hostile to Mexico, the anti-Mexican rhetoric that's been in the media over the last 12 months or so, he's really concerned that does not have a negative impact on the Mexican elections this year, in this summer, and that we find Mexico elects a president that doesn't want to trade with the United States, that would have ramifications for their economy and ours. That was a concern of his.
Right, I remember that conversation. I think there's also a broader concern, and that is what would happen if the Mexican consumers feel like they're not welcome on the U.S. side of the border. I can't remember what percentage of the McAllen sales tax revenue depends on Mexican shoppers.
It's like 30,
I was going to say, yeah, I don't remember the exact, but you're right, it's like
it's
about
high.
a third. It's very high, and so if there's something that's slowing down the shoppers from Mexico coming to the side of the border, then that will have, again, effects not just on employment here, but also the state tax revenues and the city tax revenues in the state.
And I don't think it's if that happens. I mean, there's evidence. Hotel managers in the Rio Grande Valley tell us, obviously the numbers are down. The number of Mexican visitors to the valley is down. The store owners in McAllen, Mercedes, etc., Mission would say the same thing and do say the same thing. And one of the reasons they give, and they hear it, is that people in Mexico say, well, you don't want us, we're not welcome anymore. That's playing among all the other things, the violence, the pace, the valuation of the peso. That is one of the factors. Is a lot of people are saying that.
Right, and I've heard that too anecdotally. I know it's hard to disentangle that, but I would have a hard time imagining that was not coming into play. Like you said, there are other factors, so that's why it's hard to say specifically what percentage is being lost because of negative rhetoric.
Congressman Henry Cuellar from Laredo, who represents the western part of the valley, he was saying that he speaks to restaurant owners, and that's what they're being told, and they relay that to him. So that's part of the explanation why there's been this drop in sales tax revenues for our region.
Right, and like you said, it's all interdependent because sales tax revenue, hotels, restaurants are heavily affected by Mexican consumers. And again, it goes back to people in the rest of the country don't understand how interdependent our economies are, and a lot of times people are not aware that you have very wealthy Mexicans who are coming here and spending their money and buying U.S. goods and, again, paying into U.S. services.
Going back again to that event in December when the president of the Federal Reserve Bank came down here, it wasn't part of the discussion, the public discussion, but we got a great interview afterwards with Jordana Barton and her project to address the digital divide in the Rio Grande Valley. We haven't spoken before today's event, so I didn't prime you or prompt you to talk about this, and I'm not sure how involved you are and how much you know of Jordana's plan, but to tell the audience a little bit about it, it's a key issue for the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, not just here in the Rio Grande Valley, but elsewhere. I've read about their efforts in San Antonio as well. But Jordana, the Federal Reserve Bank, has engaged with stakeholders in the valley, particularly PSJA School District and the City of FAR, to do a pilot project to get high-speed internet into the colonias, into Las Milpas, etc. And Jordana feels that there's a model here that can be replicated, and leveraging more funds, help from the university, you've probably heard that, and it can be sort of a valley-wide project going forward, and it's absolutely crucial for economic development. If I'm springing that on you, I'd like to ask you a little bit about the digital divide. It may not be your topic, but are you aware of Jordana's work?
Yes, I'm very aware. In fact, I've known Jordana now for many years. I first met her when she was a student at UT Austin. I was invited by one of her mentors, a faculty member, she was doing a project in terms of asset and capacity building along the U.S.-Mexico border. So she brought in people from around the country to be part of the dialogue and have roundtable discussions, and Jordana was her assistant at the time. So I've known Jordana. I've been very thrilled to watch her as she's progressed, and she went off and got her master's degree and is now at the San Antonio branch of the Dallas Fed. I'm very familiar with the work that they're doing in terms of trying to address the digital divide. A couple of years ago, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas updated a very famous study they had on colonias, and they had asked me to be part of their steering committee for that study, and so they said as a result of that study, that opened their eyes in terms of the issues specifically related to the digital divide in this particular region. So they took that information and decided they wanted to put that into action in terms of what can the Dallas Fed do to address this digital divide.
our reporting on this over recent years, we've felt as reporters that we don't hear enough about this issue when we go and cover the economic development corporations around the valley, that the EDCs do not appreciate how big an economic development issue this is. That if this region was wired, we would have new companies, new mom and pop shop businesses opening in the more rural areas, and those communities could become more self-sufficient. That's a key tool that all families and all companies need. Very high quality broadband services. And is there something that EDCs can do to help with this project? Is there could they focus on it a lot more than they do, and try to get more funding and put it as one of their top issues? Have you thought about that?
I'm not exactly sure in terms of the mechanics of what they can do, but I would advise them to get in touch with Jordana Barton, because I know that they've been looking for more partners, and I think part of it is just getting the word out there, because as you said, a lot of people are not aware that how serious the digital divide is, and that was something that the Dallas Fed was not aware of until they did the study, until the Colonius report that came out, which is also online at the Dallas Fed's website.
Well, let's go back to that Colonius report, if we may. How important was that document, and what did that tell us?
Well, I think it raised one of the things that raised the issue about the digital divide. I think that they've had several press releases, including in the area. I think the vibrancy of the Colonius community, I don't know if it took people necessarily by surprise, but they found this was an excellent opportunity to talk about a lot of the opportunities and success stories, rather than just being concerned about what some of the challenges were.
Okay, we're being told by the producers that perhaps we need to charge the camera, so we'll have a pause. We'll have a couple of minutes while everyone can get a coffee and hopefully come back while we do this. Is that okay?
That's fine.
I'm going to help the producers get that done.
All right. Looking for the charger? I have one in my purse. I carry one with me nowadays because my phone just doesn't keep a charge very long.
Sorry about that, guys. But I think we're back in action. We're back. Okay.
Okay.
Let's move on to the other topic I wanted to talk about, which is the books that you've penned, you've written, authored, and perhaps neither of us can remember the titles because they're so long.
Right.
So those will be prompted. Here's one, I'm told: the Hispanic entrepreneurs in the 2000s. And economic profile and the policy implications. And I know this is an issue that you care passionately about.
Yes.
So tell us about that book and your research of that.
All right. This is a book that it's published by Stanford University Press. My co-author is Alberto Davila, who is also my husband. So we do collaborate. He's an economist and the senior associate dean, in fact, in the Robert C. Vacker College of Business and Entrepreneurship. And he will be at the event this afternoon in Weslaco. This was a book that came up through some of our own research. We had been working a lot on economic outcomes of Hispanics, and we realized that Hispanic businesses were somewhat ignored in terms of the impact that they were making for the U.S. economy. And one of the fastest growing groups of entrepreneurs in at least the book came out a few years ago, but the first decade of the 2000s was Hispanic entrepreneurs. A lot of that was driven by Hispanic immigrants, and then among that group, a lot of it was driven by Hispanic immigrant women. And we just felt that was a story that needed to be told, and we go through different topics in terms of what basically it's a profile of what Hispanic entrepreneurs at that time were looking like.
And whatever time that was published, how
it came out in, I think it was December 2013.
Oh, it's not too long ago.
It's not too long ago, and
but I can only imagine it's been accelerating ever since because of the demographic changes and the Hispanic population being that much younger. Yes. That as they become adults, the students of today or yesterday, they're becoming adults and they're starting businesses. Those figures you came up with in your research, it must only be bigger now.
I would think it would be bigger now. At the time, we found that it wasn't just the population growth itself, because with more Hispanics, you're going to have more Hispanic business owners. But we also found that within the Hispanic population, self-employment rates were also rising. So there was something happening with the Hispanic population that seemed to be creating more entrepreneurial opportunities. So we've been very pleased with the press that book has gotten, and it won an award.
What was the award?
It was the Choice Award. Was one. I was at a conference a couple of years ago, and a colleague said, "Well, congratulations for the award." It's like, what award? And so Stanford University Press had our book on display, and it had a little sign that said award-winning books. So that was very nice.
Well, it was an important topic.
It was an important topic. And that actually came about. We weren't initially planning to write a book, I should say. So we had been presenting some papers at conferences, and the acquiring editor of Stanford University Press asked us to meet. Like, she saw us in the conference program and said, "Hey, do you guys think you might want to write a book? We think there'll be interest in this." Wow. It's like we weren't thinking about it, but it sounds like a good idea. So we submitted a proposal and it was accepted.
Yes, and I think we can see I think the corporations of America, they understand the importance of the Hispanic market. You see that in all the commercials, and the growth of the Spanish-speaking media outlets that are growing, and the focus on that market in terms of advertising. But in the media, there doesn't the number of Hispanic reporters, yes, Mexican-American reporters, etc., that lags. And then, therefore, you in news coverage, especially on the East Coast, there's just an under-reporting of this market. That's an observation as a media person that I have, and so books like yours, obviously try to address that, because there just isn't enough. There's not enough Latinos in movies and entertainment and Hollywood, and there's not enough in the media, primetime TV, news channels, etc.
Right. So, I'm completely with you on that.
Are you?
Yeah, we feel that more presence in terms of higher impact and being able to be in positions to serve as positive role models, yes, is lacking.
And here in the Valley, I mean, it's sort of second nature. This is right. This is our economy, but elsewhere, that appreciation isn't there. Okay, we're going to talk about another book now, and our researchers have found Population, Migration and Socio-Economic Outcomes of Island and Mainland Puerto Ricans, La Crisis Boricua. And this is a brand new book, Maria, that you've penned. And for you, this is sort of personal. Tell us about it.
Right, so this actually just came out late November, so it's around Thanksgiving. And this is another one that we weren't initially planning to write a book about. So this is co-authored also with Alberto Davila and then Avidan Rodriguez, who was, in fact, our provost at Utrgv and now is the president at University at Albany. We were writing a book chapter several years ago, and it was and it had to do with Puerto Ricans on the mainland. And the more we were digging into the data, we just found that there was something happening in Puerto Rico. And so we just kept digging, and before we knew it, we had several papers. And it was the same thing at a conference. One of the acquiring editors said I was presenting something, so had we thought about writing a book on it? It's like we hadn't thought about it, but it sounds like a good idea. And so it just, as I was talking with some colleagues before the book came out, he said, "You probably have enough material for 8 books." And we probably do, and this was before the hurricane. And so one of the things that a lot of people are not aware of is that Puerto Rico was already facing a humanitarian crisis before Hurricane Maria. It wasn't something new with the hurricane. A lot of it had to do with an economic crisis, and that's why we have the La Crisis part of the title, since 2006. Since 2006, there's been a huge outmigration to the U.S. mainland. In fact, Texas is one of the big receiving areas of new migrants from the island. We estimate about 647,000 Puerto Ricans left the island on net over the past 11 years. And again, this is before the hurricane.
Wow.
And this is the largest number in terms of outmigrants that the island has on record. Relative to the size of the population, it's smaller percentage-wise compared to the Great Migration of the 1950s. But with the hurricane, it's likely it's likely just to continue to escalate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we had a news report the other day that some of the big Caribbean cruise liners, obviously they're not docking there, so that tourism's being lost because the island's still devastated. It's still devastated.
There's still a significant number of people who don't have electricity, and that's something to. The American Economic Association had their annual meetings this past weekend in Philadelphia, so I was there and I had organized a panel discussion about this crisis in Puerto Rico, and the emphasis is these are American citizens, and so it's a big concern if you have American citizens, millions who lack electricity 3 months after devastation. I get annoyed when my electricity went out a couple of weeks ago for like 2 hours, and I was very frustrated by that. And I can't imagine 3 months, because in a 3-month period, when you're losing basic critical functions, there are estimates about the number of mortalities, that the deaths are underreported because people are dying as a result of the slow recovery effort, not because of the storm itself. There's still a significant number of people without access to clean drinking water. You have hospitals that are running on generators rather than having a solid source of electricity. So it is truly a crisis. And again, our book is about the crisis before the hurricane, but it's only gotten so much worse.
What's the population there now?
The population has continued to fall. The latest estimates is 3.3 million. It had peaked about 3.9 million mid-2000s.
I was sort of surprised when, after the hurricane, in the aftermath, and everyone could see that devastation, that there were not more calls in Washington from members of Congress or senators to say, okay, look, let's acknowledge, that Puerto Rico is part of the US, and that it becomes a state in its own right. It becomes the 51st state. You haven't heard anything like that? That's deserving for this. Right. That's big enough to warrant that.
Right, and so that's something that I think people also don't realize. So even with the population has fallen on net, again, it peaked at 3.9 million and is now at 3.3 million. Puerto Rico has a population that's larger than 21 states and DC. So it's not like this tiny little, we're talking about millions of American citizens. One of the problems with big territory is that Puerto Rico does not have representation in Congress. They have somebody who is there, but it's just more of a figurehead rather than actually having a vote. So Congress doesn't have, our elected officials are not held accountable by the Puerto Rican population because they don't have that voice.
Direct representation in Washington.
And I have seen, though, some of the state governments have been taking a very proactive role. New York, for example, as well as Florida, which makes sense because those are the two states with the largest Puerto Rican populations. Some people may not know that actually Florida now has as many Puerto Ricans as New York does, about 1.1 million in both states.
Are there any particular websites where people can find out more information, or any appeals, charities that are working to help that you want to give a plug to?
One of the websites, there are obviously lots of different websites, but the Centro, CENTRO website, which is it's the Center for Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College. They have a whole list of websites in terms of different charities, and my understanding is that they take a look at them before they post them, just to have some. Any other books that we can mention? Several years ago, Albert and I published an edited volume on labor market issues along the U.S.-Mexico border. And that was it's an edited volume, so we had different collaborators put in chapters, but it was one that we wanted to raise awareness of. Again, the positive issues that we have along the border.
Question from a member of the audience. What would be the economic impact if the US did count Puerto Rico as an equal member?
That's actually a very deep question.
We've got time.
Yes, I don't have an answer on the top of my head. Because they are a territory, the U.S., there's already obviously free mobility of labor, but what I'm a little bit concerned about, and I need to read more in terms of the latest tax bill that was passed, because I believe there's a provision in there that would tax goods produced in Puerto Rico, or that's part of the discussion, which would be adding more devastation because that would be making the goods produced in Puerto Rico more expensive. As it is, Puerto Rico being a territory is subject to something called the Jones Act. It's a Merchant Marine Act. So goods that are moving between Puerto Rico and the they have to move between Puerto Rico and the U.S., or those that do have to be on U.S. owned, U.S. crewed, U.S. built ships. And so there have been estimates about that as causing Puerto Rico to lose its competitiveness.
Right.
If it was an equal member, as this question asked, then, well, I could actually take that back. That the Jones Act would still apply because Alaska and Hawaii are also subject
That's
to that.
true.
So,
yeah.
I think we would need to see more. Yeah, we would need to
do more research
exactly.
to give a good answer on that. So let's be clear. Was there any other books that we can mention that you've penned, or important articles, important research you'd like to mention?
I think these would represent some of the latest ones.
Okay. So come back to the Valley. Tell us about the courses you teach at Utrgv. Obviously economics, but how is that going? What are our students like? Are they good students? Do they really care about economics? I'm sure they do. Tell us about your work within the university.
Okay, so I'm a professor of economics, and one course I teach almost every semester is the principles of macroeconomics. So it's an introductory course, and I know that a lot of students, when they sign up for it, many of them don't want to take it. They hear really bad things about it, that it's boring, it's hard. So I was a student too, and I remember taking classes to avoid economics. I just fell in love with it once I realized what it was about. So I like to teach the introductory course so that students can understand that econ isn't necessarily what they have in mind. It's a very broad field, and so I tell people it's a very broad umbrella. There's something in it for everybody. I have a lot of fun with the macro students. This past semester I taught a course on the economics of the government sector, and so that was also a fun course. I don't teach that one very often, and that was fun as well to talk about, especially with, you have changes in a president, you have changes in Congress, to actually have a course where you can talk about what some of these changes mean for the economy, what some of the issues are.
And how many professors of economics are there at the university?
I should know the exact number off the top of my
Roughly?
head. I think it would be about 10 to 12. So
Okay.
my department, we have this Department of Economics and Finance. So I think our department's about 16 to 18 faculty members. And it's about half and half, maybe a little bit more on the econ side.
And I'm sure you have some great success stories of students that have gone beyond the university and taken their studies further afield.
Yeah, and that's what you were asking in terms of what the students are like.
Yes.
I love teaching at Utrgv. I mean,
Okay.
I love our students. I just think that we have just such enthusiasm among our students, and our top students would be competitive anywhere. A lot of our students, many of them do go on. We don't have a ton of econ majors, but the ones that we have tend to do very well. We've had some that have gone off to get their PhDs at schools like Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland. We've also had students who have gone to get graduate degrees at Texas A&M, also at Duke University. We've had people have gone off and got their law degree because econ is a good undergraduate major to have for law school as well.
Mm-hmm. So great students at Utrgv, as good as anywhere else.
Yes.
And because the university is so new, things are only going to get bigger and better as it becomes better established.
Yes, I believe so. To some extent, though, I think with a course like the Principles of Macro, because we offer so many sections of it, the transition to Utrgv from UT, I had been at UT Pan American, I didn't see, there wasn't so much of a shift for that class. I think where we'll see more of the changes will be with the smaller, like the upper division classes, and like, for example, the PhD program moving to Weslaco. That's going to be a big shift in terms of how the different institutions are viewing Utrgv, and it's another way to unify our campuses.
Mm-hmm. What was I going to ask next? Tell us, I want to give you some time also. Oh, by the way, my publisher's telling me I should be asking the viewers if they have any questions to text. Our producer's saying we don't say that enough. So if you are watching and you have any questions for Maria, please text them in and we'll get them to her. But I want to give some time as well for you to talk a little bit more about your specialty. The area that you like to cover most and research most. I think it's to do with employment.
Yes.
Please tell us about that.
Okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a labor economist, so that means I'm just very interested in issues that affect labor market outcomes. And one of the issues that affects labor market outcomes is educational attainment. As a result, in fact, that was why I got interested in economics to begin with, is that growing up in Albuquerque, the school district was very uneven. So it's Albuquerque Public Schools, but they built a new high school, and it was all the great resources went into this high school, but they drew the boundary in such a way that it excluded certain neighborhoods, and that new high school cherry-picked the best teachers from throughout the district, and it just seemed, I thought, to be unfair that you're part of the same school district, but you're not getting the same quality of education. And so that is something that I am very interested in studying, is issues that affect educational attainment, because educational attainment in turn plays such a big role in our labor market outcomes. And over the past couple of decades, education has only become increasingly important. So if we are having structural factors that are holding people back from their potential, then that has long-term economic consequences. And also, given the growing demographics of the Hispanic population, if they're not able to access the same quality of schooling and graduate in the same numbers, then that will set the U.S. back in terms of being competitive, not just compared to where we were in the past, but also globally.
And those studies, that research that you've done, do you bring it down to the Rio Grande Valley level? Can you say, are there any structural issues we have to address here in the valley?
Mine has focused more at the national level and using more like the national data sets. I remembered I would have to check the most recent numbers, but a few years ago I was looking at educational attainment along the U.S.-Mexico border versus the interior. Our education levels in the region are lower than the U.S. average, but actually if you just only look at the Hispanic population, our education levels are higher than Hispanics in the rest of the country on average.
Is that at the college level or the high school level?
This was just looking at on average. Yes, in terms, the average number of years of schooling. So,
that's very encouraging.
Yes, I haven't looked at the more recent numbers, but that is something I think that gets lost in terms of.
So let's say that again. Repeat that for the viewers. How good things are.
A few years ago, I wouldn't say. I mean, there's going to be room for improvement.
Okay.
But when you only look at the Hispanic population, and not total population, but Hispanic population, average education levels were higher in the border or along the border than in the U.S. interior on average.
Well, that deserves a story.
So, and that's something, yes, and so I need to dig back into more recent numbers to see if the pattern has continued.
Can you keep us abreast of that?
I will.
Yeah, because that deserves explaining, and with the population, the people of the valley, to be educated on that. If I haven't got any more questions from our researchers or producers, I'm going to ask: is there anything else is there anything we haven't covered that you wanted to talk to the audience about today? Anything else you'd like to say? Any big projects coming up that we should know about? So
big projects, but well, again, the move of the PhD program to West Loco is a very big one.
Have we covered everything?
I think that you've actually covered everything. I'm glad that you brought up the work of Jordana.
Oh, good.
Because I think that's something that deserves more attention. And as you mentioned, in terms of what role businesses in the area can play, would be to get in touch with her, because she's the one, like kind of the mastermind. Like she's seeing where the pieces need to fall into place.
Do you think we can get, with your help, we could bring Jordana down
to
have a live stream as well?
I would think so. I would think so. And that's something that I've been learning, like again with the Colonia study, and also with what she's doing with the digital divide, and now being a board member with the Dallas Fed. The Dallas Feds, and I think it's this movement wide in terms of the Federal Reserve System. They really want to do much more with the community, and here again the voices on the ground to have better informed monetary policy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, she and the board are definitely focused on that issue, and that's going to be great for the Rio Grande Valley going forward.
Yes.
So, Maria, thank you so much for today's interview. Thanks for dropping by the studio and giving us some quality time to discuss your work at the university and your work with the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, San Antonio branch. We really appreciate you coming on the RGG Live, and please keep in touch.
All right, thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.